Again, welcome back. We are now moving on to our next and final panel, which continues to analyze LP activity in the region. So let us give a very warm welcome to our panelists. Matias, Kaila, Head of Fund Investments at TESI, Chris Wade, co-founder and partner at Isomer Capital, Emma Honkanen, Investment Associate at EQ Group, Kristine, Berzina, founder of Livonia Partners and Latvian VCA Chairwoman. And the panel will be moderated by Margus Uudam, Chairman of Estonian VCA and founding partner of Karma Ventures. The stage is yours.
Great. Before we head into the panel discussion, let's take a look at a few slides more. And on data points, what really comes as a surprising if we look at the private equity and venture capital investments to GDP, we see that Nordic is doing well above Europe, but Baltic seems to be a bit of outlier. It caught me by surprise as well, and Estonia is here to blame. A few of the success stories have raised really a lot lately and made Estonian investments to a 2% GDP level. And when I look at the next slide, which is a comparison of the investor types in private equity and venture capital funds, we see quite a difference. So obviously, CE region is still quite strongly supported by public investors. But Nordic investors have really healthy share of foundations, endowments, and fund of fund and other asset managers' activity. The structure is quite different. And obviously, we need to look much more into it. Is there one dominant fund of fund who is doing most of it? Is there enough depth? Is there enough different strategies and areas of focus? So this is definitely more to explore. But now, going to our panel. Thank you all for joining. And Kadri made a quick intro who you are, but it would be great still hear a bit more insight of what's the latest for you, what you focus on. And Matias, what if we start with you? So TESI has been really instrumental in building the ecosystem in Finland. And what's the mission you are on? And what's next steps for TESI?
Thanks, Margus. What's next for TESI? Of course, as you mentioned, we've been building a lot of the ecosystem in Finland, but we also see a lot of development ahead. We see the need for Finland to be part of the greater Northern European and European ecosystem, and therefore being able to benefit also for the success of the wider ecosystem. And this is where we are helping. So we are not just focusing on activities in Finland, but we are also partnering very actively with investors and ecosystem players outside Finland and ensuring those ecosystem players are well connected to the Finnish ecosystem. Also, where we are focusing quite a lot is as an LP and as an investor, as we do both fund investments and direct investments, is that we are gathering a lot of information. We have, as a state investor, we have, one could say, even unfair resources in terms of being a public investor, but we try to bring it back to the ecosystem. So as a key part of our strategy, we are building on now on our own data, what we are accumulating through investment operations, as well as consolidating different market data together and bringing that back to the market in order to increase the visibility in the Finnish ecosystem, but we're also building capabilities to also replicate that through the whole Nordics and Europe as well, if need be, in order to ensure that even the smaller investors who don't have the access to the deal flow, who don't have access to the market data, who could have the visibility to invest in the sector. That's probably in a nutshell what we're doing.
Great, thanks. Emma, you're a very professional investor in private equity and have strong thesis on it. Why Nordics? Why private equity? Maybe you can give a bit of insight to your strategy.
Yes. So my name is Emma Honkanen, and I have been part of the EQ Asset Management private equity team since 2016. And EQ is a fund of fund manager, and we have a special focus on the lower mid-market buyout funds into Northern Europe. And the Northern Europe lower mid-market is the sector we have been concentrating for over 25 years now. So it's a long-term expertise we have gained in this sector, and that has been our investment focus for the long time period. EQ Asset Management is one of the largest independent asset manager in Finland, with total AUM of 9 billion euros, of which 4.2 billion is in private equity. So it's a remarkable part of the EQ Group's assets under management. And today our private equity team is managing in total almost 30 private equity fund of funds and client mandates. Our investor base consists mainly of Finnish institutional investors like foundation, universities, and smaller pension funds and insurance companies. And we raised our latest Northern European fund of funds last year, and we reached total commitments of 205 million euros, which we are currently investing.
Great, thank you. Kristine, you are investing in private equity in Baltics. So how do you see the market? How do you see the opportunities from GP perspective? You might be on a mute. Yes, we still cannot hear you yet. As you try to fix the audio part, what if I move on with Chris at the moment? Chris, Isomer is a sounds like kind of startup among fund of funds. You invest in early managers, emerging managers in Europe, and is it something that you do out of belief, or do you have data to prove as well that it can be really successful? So maybe few glimpses into Isomer.
Well, thank you, Margus, and thank you everybody for arranging a remarkably good conference, which I've enjoyed for the last 2 or 3 hours. Isomer is about a fundamental idea, and that is startups are not a national sport. When we set up Isomer in 2014, we thought it would be very interesting to have a fund of funds focused on where the majority of the capital was at that time in Europe, which was the UK, Germany, and France, and it represented about 66% of all capital. But we realized that this was an error, because Farfetch was created in Portugal. At the time, UiPath was emerging in Romania. TransferWise was becoming significant out of Estonia. Spotify was becoming very significant in Sweden. And we realized that Europe is this wonderful place where startup entrepreneurship can happen anywhere, because the fundamental tools available are available anywhere. So we built a startup, yes, fund of funds business to invest in Europe, invest in Northern Europe. We are very strong on the belief system of Northern Europe for all the reasons that you've heard. But this fundamental idea is we don't invest in Estonian VCs or Swedish VCs. We invest in Swedish and Estonian and Danish and Finnish VCs because they're investing in Europe. And they're investing, whether that's the whole of Europe or a part of Europe, but they're investing. The other thing that's a fundamental to this startup called Isomer is we are a platform for our investors to understand Europe. Our mission, beyond the boring of producing a good return and supporting the VCs that we back and investing in the companies that they invest in, is to enable new LP capital to understand Europe, to understand venture capital in Europe, which is not chasing the US. I forget who said it. We're not chasing Silicon Valley. We're building our very own unique ecosystem, which is equally as strong and in some cases has some preferential features to it to that has gone before. So we're all about creating a diverse set of LPs who can enjoy the benefits of what clearly is a revolution in innovation and entrepreneurship, and sadly boosted by the last 12 months pandemic activities.
Great. Thank you, Chris. I have supportive voices in my head that we have Kristine back with audio. So,
I hope so.
Yes, you're back. Great, thank you.
Good.
So, private equity investment scene in Baltics and you as a GP, how do you see it?
Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Very nice to see you, Margus. So I'm Kristine Berzina. I'm one of the founders of Livonia Partners. We are a private equity fund investing in Baltic companies. And we have been investing for about a little bit more than 5 years now. So some 5 years ago, we were a first-time fund. And right now, we are on the route to raise the next fund. Let's say our strategy, where do we put our investments into, have not really changed since we started. We are looking for Baltic companies who are ambitious and grow and want to grow internationally, or those companies who are working on local markets who either are #1 market leaders or are aspiring to be so. And we, of course, invest in people. It's not only about capital. The key is really about relationship and trust between us and the management teams and entrepreneurs we work with. So I think we are a generalist fund, given that we are in private equity and in relatively small economies. And I think half of our portfolio is in manufacturing. A big part of our portfolio is in technology. We have a retail company. So we have invested across several sectors. And speaking of the next fund, it's going to be more or less the same handwriting. Companies who are growing and have ambition to grow very, very quickly, and very courageous management teams. One big new theme for us is and will be sustainable investment. because we have kind of over the last years, we have been discussing internally and figuring out how we can contribute. And what we came up with from the next fund to make a pledge to invest an amount which is at least 10% of the fund size across portfolio companies investing to initiatives and projects which will have positive environmental impact, either through solving climate change or pollution or other environmental problems. So that's us.
Really great to hear. Thank you. Matias, back to you. You have done a lot of data mining and research on the LP activity in Nordics. Maybe you can give us a bit insight. How does it look like? Is it diverse? Is it enough what we have as LP activity? And if not, what's the potential next steps?
Well, I think we have quite diverse base of investors in the Northern Europe, but I think the problem is a bit of a mismatch of a capital and who's getting access to it, and there's probably some things to it that might explain it to it. Now, of course, we have large pension funds in almost all the countries, especially in the Nordics, which are very strong and dominant, even to the extent that they're probably getting too big for the ecosystem, as Sami Lampinen pointed in earlier. So one of the earlier panel discussions about that the fact that the local ecosystem, the fund sizes, they haven't been growing in the same pace as the balance sheet of the large investors in the region. That's one part of the mismatch, and also, because they're being big, they need to be diversifying their order, whether they're exposed in other asset classes into the region, for them to then make a suboptimal decision on their allocation process. It's very difficult for them to allocate the money in the sector. And of course, there's mismatch, especially on finding those investors able to invest 5 to 10 million which tickets to the funds, which is very, very crucial on many of the fundraisings to get to the target size, both in terms of VC as well as small cap and emerging teams in general. Typically, when we look at the fund sizes below 100 million, and that's where the especially state investors are very crucial. I think what would be very beneficial for the region, and this is where I put it a bit bluntly, is that perhaps GPs as well as the large LPs would need to get out of the bubble in this understanding that even though they have the visibility to the deal flow, they have visibility to the market, they would need to ensure that also smaller LPs across the borders would have the visibility, who's been raising funds at what time, who's about to come to the fundraise, giving more insight to what's really driving the value in the industry, what's really driving the returns, not just the success stories of the unicorns, which are easy to explain, but what is really the fund model, what is really driving the returns beyond the unicorns as well. That would be very helpful. And sharing the context, I think more the LPs are exposed and the potential LPs are exposed to different discussion, the fundraising, different GPs, talking to LPs, and then also interaction between the larger LPs and smaller LPs, the more we are able to get the capital to the region. The region is, and the players in the ecosystem are highly codependent, and that should be acknowledged, and that's an effort that GPs and larger LPs should make for the ecosystem.
Thank you. And maybe back to Kristine to discuss a bit also the Baltic LP activity and how it has developed. So it's definitely the development over the last maybe 5 or 7 years where we have seen a lot of activity. And we have also seen the risks related to it. Estonian pension fund reform, for example, which allows people to take money out of pension funds, has significant impact on our ecosystem and ability for funds to raise next funds and keep providing capital to startups and entrepreneurs. So what is your take on the LP activity, how sustainable it is as we look at the Baltic only?
Having had conversations with our fund investors, having had conversations with our fund investors and other Baltic investors in the last 9 months, what we can see, what we have seen, clearly there is a lot of maturity across Baltic institutional investors. We are having we're having very different conversations compared to how it was 5-6 years ago. And of course, we have been maturing, investors have been maturing. There is definitely a wider openness to alternative investment funds. It's on one hand, it's very nice to be in a position of not being the first time fund, and we are grateful to those investors who supported us during that time. And all of the investors are also pledging to support us for the second fund, which of course is a fantastic thing to have. So maturity, a much stronger focus on sustainability. In terms of some of the investors are saying this is fundamentally your approach to ESG is more of it's almost a hygienic factor. You just have to do it. You cannot not do it. Some of the investors are more proactive in terms of exploring how GPs and funds and private equity funds and venture funds investing into environmental initiatives, fair diversity and fair pay and other initiatives. Of course, on a risk side and negative side, no question, as this Estonian government's or former government's experiment with pension system, I think it has been widely regarded as one of the most uncontrolled experiments with pension systems in Europe. And there is caution from Estonian institutional investors. There is no question about it. Having said that, it's not that the Estonian investors are getting negative on alternative investment funds. They are still very keen to invest. But of course, right now, exactly, we are like 1 month away from the first deadline when the pension funds will see how much money people will withdraw.
And it's definitely an example how fragile the single country strategies or markets can be based on either economic developments or political changes or changes in legislation. So Emma, when we prepared for the call, you said you are not sure about venture yet, and private equity is clear. But what it takes actually for such a professional investor like you to start investing in venture, considering venture, having seen quite a few success stories coming out of Nordics and Baltics?
Oh, well, at EQ, our strategy is quite clear that it's a lower mid-market buyout fund. So, of course, we review our strategy every year, but this is what we have been doing for 25 years. So moving to venture would require some, perhaps, a different team or some other structure. But with the current team, I think our focus will stay in the lower mid-market buyout funds.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What's your view on data? Like, do you feel like if you decide to start investing in venture, do you have good enough data about systematically producing positive returns? This is an asset class you can sell, you can believe in. So how do you feel, how advanced is the venture ecosystem for you?
Well, of course, we met some venture capital players also, especially the Finnish ones. We want to be aware of the market. So I think we have fairly good information, but of course there could be more information, and especially for the smaller, less experienced investors, I think the venture capital investments might be a bit new thing, and it would be difficult to understand the value creation model. For example, for buyout investors, it sometimes seems like a big leap of faith to invest in a company that is making a huge amount of loss, for example. So probably for the smaller private and family office investors, it must be one thing that they would need more information about the VC investing and understand better the ecosystem.
Yes, and data, leading role models, lead investors, everything would absolutely contribute it. Now, Chris, you are running fund of fund for a venture. How do you see how fund of funds potentially impact the ecosystem, and what benefits it might have for the ecosystem? Last panel was also talking quite a lot about the potential fund of fund logic for Nordic and Baltics. It's not just only money; it's probably more.
Yes, I think that's right. Look, I think where Europe ultimately needs to get to is a lot more private capital going into venture, and so we need to create a kind of working group, whether that's in the Nordics, the Baltics, the new Nordics, or more generally in Europe. It is a matter for others. But what we can understand is that Europe is part of as I mentioned earlier, a revolution of young people creating tomorrow's technology leaders. And that is not marketing, that is fact. Already this year, Auto One in Germany has had a very successful multi-billion IPO. There are 2 or 3 scheduled that we're very close to in the UK that will be big IPOs. This is the next phase of European venture, where not only are companies of a similar interest and technology development to anywhere else in the world, but the outcomes are becoming similar. And so that is really important. Now, we always focus on these kind of conferences on those great big outcomes. But just this week, a Finnish company called AppGyver, which I think, Margus, you're familiar with, got acquired by SAP, an entirely European story that everybody's very excited about. And that is the day-to-day business of venture capital. And that is putting some money in and getting a 4 or 5 times return within a reasonable time period. We just hear about those enormous outcomes, but this is much more of the day-to-day. And I think what fund of funds who are already in existence, like Isomer, but there are others as well, should be offering to regions like the Baltics and the Nordics is a way of sharing some of the data, some of the thoughts, and some of the conclusions that we come to that make us invest in VCs with a great deal of conviction, and so far with some success. We have reviewed over 100 VCs in the Nordics and the Baltics. We know the track record, we know the data, we know everything about them. Now, obviously that's not our business to be sharing that, but I think having some way of being able to encourage other LPs to understand that potential and then decide whether it's for them would be a really, really good point. We pride ourselves at Isomer of being the least thing we are is capital. What we want to be is supporters, particularly of funds when they're starting their journey as a fund manager, in terms of all those things that you need to think about when you're building your firm, but also at the company level, helping the companies think about connecting with overseas LPs or overseas investors, particularly corporates that can help them. Because I do believe we're on a trend now where acquisitions are not just coming from the US, but also from Europe and other parts of the world. So it's much more deploying capital, which makes the fund of funds world a very exciting one.
And also through your activity, you have activated new investors, new LPs from Europe, but also you have a strong Japanese angle as well. So you develop the market additionally, bringing new LPs to market who later can build their independent strategies.
I'll be accused of being pompous and old-fashioned and all those things that people love to say about me. But I'm in my early 60s. I've had an entrepreneurial career. I've had a venture capital career. I've had an angel career. I could be putting my boots up now very nicely. But what drives me every single day, and my partners and colleagues at Isomer, is what we call, and here's the pompous bit, solving the last remaining problem in Europe for venture. And that is the number of LPs. Just the sheer number of LPs that are investing in venture. And that's what our mission is all about. It shouldn't be that some of our best funds still take too long to raise capital, or have to rely exclusively on government programs. And I don't want to be negative about those government programs. They've been vital, and they've become some of the most professional LPs in the world.
Yeah. So last panel was discussing a lot also the need to work together more as a region, Nordic and Baltic. And may I test also in this panel, where is the sense of urgency? Do you think it makes sense? Do you see opportunities in it? And from which angle the kind of thinking mostly is coming from? And again, it can be stepping back, looking at the competition like US and Europe. And even there are signs Europe is acquiring more European technologies, keeping value here as well. But US is still very, very dominant in acquiring European technologies and capturing all the value, taking away some of the tech talent. Is it just as some, and actually not some, but really many have you mentioned sustainability? We could do so much more, potentially sharing the best practices and implementing fast across the region, being still fairly small countries on the global scene. So how do you see the Nordic-Baltic cooperation, sense of urgency and motivation for it? Emma, maybe you want to start.
Yes. Well, I think it would make much sense to further develop the Nordic-Baltic cooperation between LPs. I think it applies both on the private equity as well as the VC side. I think, for example, in Finland, we have fairly tight and close LP community, among which we can share quite well the information and ideas. But the other countries, they probably have the similar communities. But I would like to see more cross-border cooperation between LPs. Of course, there is some at the moment as well, but it's mainly around some certain subject or certain investments. So to be able to exchange the ideas and views more freely, there should be more platforms to do that, like some events directed to Nordic-Baltic LPs where the ideas could be exchanged more openly.
Great.
And
yes.
I think typically local investors have the best perspective to the development of the local PE scene. So sharing the best information within the area would help developing the ecosystem as well.
Kristine, what's your view also from Latvian VCA point of view? So how to see the opportunities?
I think in reality, nowadays capital doesn't have borders. It's as simple as that. Some 8-10 years ago, there were Estonian funds, Latvian funds, Lithuanian funds. Now all of the funds are Baltic funds in terms of attracting LPs, in terms of having investment strategies, at least Baltic funds. Many of the funds actually investing into European companies or much wider. So we are there, and it's only a matter of time while also the LPs cooperation will become more borderless. Let's put it in this way. And if we talk about like companies, the actual companies where we invest money into, there used to be a saying, corporate banks follow their customers. We have to follow our customers. We have built portfolio companies across borders. So we have invested into 2 Estonian companies who have consolidated companies in Finland. So it's just logical to go and expand.
Mm-hmm. Great. Matias, you represent government institution, and for governments it's always very tricky topic to discuss investments outside of your home country. How to explain it to taxpayers? What shall you get back? And then from your point of view, it would be particularly brave step to initiate and work much more on cross-border activities and investment activities. What's your sense of urgency? What's your vision for Nordic and Baltic region?
Well, as you put it nicely, it's not easy. As you, of course, every national promotion institution, they have their policies behind, and politicians, having their incentives and their eye on what we do, and even the media. But of course, we need, first of all, the national promotional institution. We would need to be cleverer than we've been in the past. So we would need to be better on showing the impacts, what we are doing, and the cooperation we are able to do cross-border, just beyond the capital, which is going back and forth. That's one thing to start. I think there's a lot of opportunities also for the national players who really know the ecosystem to be the bridge and between the countries, as we know all of the other national institutions and large LPs across. So in ensuring that there is a cooperation created among the different countries, and also ensuring that we ourselves are well networked in our own countries as well, in terms of whether it's university cooperation, so we get better start for the science-based innovation, whether it's being a better network with local larger corporates in order to be able to channel back and forth the expertise in various industries that we've been accumulating expertise in different countries. Because as you, Margus, put it in the beginning, we are only 33 million people in the Baltics and Nordics, which is only a minor fraction of what's there globally. And when you talk to the investors coming outside Europe, they don't see Finland, they don't see Estonia, they don't see Sweden and so forth. They are seeing Nordics. And that's basically the brand we should be building on. That's where we should be building on the local strengths and expertise that we've been accumulating, and try to pull that together and ensuring that's how we're working that together.
So Chris, maybe it's hard to ask from you about sense of urgency about Nordic-Baltic cooperation based in UK, investing all over Europe. But would you consider investment strategy from fund-of-fund point of view to focus more closely for Nordic and Baltic region? Is it big region enough for viable investment strategy, for example, in venture?
Well, let me say what the sense of what is the sense of urgency? My view, the sense of urgency is those who might invest in venture, i.e. potential LPs, who are not sure. I think the sense of urgency is to make that decision because I think Europe and the Baltics and Nordics are going through some golden years in the next 5 years or so. Now, I have no reason to say it's 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, but let's just call it 5 years. There is a dramatic digital transformation revolution happening across all sectors of the industry. There are a significant set of new technologies coming to play to power that. And those innovations will not come from the traditional large existing companies, period. So therefore, it is only going to come from technology startups. So the urgency is, if you have a private equity mandate, is how long are you going to miss this wave from that perspective? On the subject of sustainability, I don't believe there's anything that LPs or VCs need to do, because young people who are building these companies that we all want to invest in fundamentally are building sustainability companies, period. So the asset class that is available to invest in is mostly sustainable or complies with ESG ideas. And that's a very encouraging, wonderful thing to say, but it isn't a special sector. It isn't a special thing. It is just what young people are building in Europe today. I think there is a sense of urgency in our business, and the sense of urgency is to get the capital where it belongs, and that is those companies that are going to truly be Europe's technology leaders in the future. We are absolutely convinced that the notion that only the technology companies that we all hear of will not come in the future just from the West Coast. There are some very good reasons why that is the case historically, but those reasons exist in Europe today. So there is an urgency in that sense, in the sense that we need to get more capital into the system. And we mentioned earlier today about growth. You know, it's a tragic shame that a company gets sold for 100 million when actually there was the management capability, there was the market demand, there was the uniqueness of product such that actually that company could be $1 billion company. And that's not just about returns for investors, that's about return to the economic value of the countries that those people work in.
Great. So we need to start wrapping up. And we have heard many thoughts that there is potentially possible to do more together. Like Emma mentioned about LP activity, there is more to learn from cross-border activity, more to communicate in sustainability, in diversity. I'd like to conclude these thoughts from you. How can we take it forward from here? And what could be the potential practical steps capturing the ideas, what have been shared over this event? Is it task force, working groups, and so on. So, or shall we just organize next event next year and see where we have landed? So, Matias, do you want to start and please everyone with bold practical ideas where we take it from here?
I have very concrete steps that could be taken. Because one of the issues, as we've been discussing today, is that we need to make the ecosystem more stable. So we need to be able to grow the fund sizes, lock up the capital to the funds, so the LP capital there, so that we have a more stable ecosystem over the cycle with sticky capital in the funds, rather than those funds going directly to the companies, which is always depending on the next funding round. So what we need to start with is really making, as the industry has already succeeded in buyout, is making VC also a investable financial product, because all the GPs are competing on the fundraising, with most of the investors not being 100% dedicated to the VC. So basically, they're competing with all the other products which are available for the investors across the world, across the capital markets. So what we are seeing and what we are hearing is that there is a lot of jargon that industry is putting in place and making really messy. People don't understand the value creation model, and also putting on top of that, we have the closed-ended, well-functioning fund model, but which is very difficult to explain to those who are entering the scene. So I think what I'm putting into the table is a challenge for the GPs, that the GPs should, step up on ensuring that they are able to articulate the opportunity for the investors in the investors' language, not on the language of the startups and the VCs. That's how we make it more investable while still maintaining the entrepreneurial mindset that is embedded in the industry.
Great. Kristine, from VCA point of view, do you have practical ideas how VCAs could work more together and potentially bring the need and sense of urgency of doing more together forward?
It's thanks, Margus. It's a bit of a tough one, right? Because we've been discussing the joint cooperation for a number of years now. But in reality, I think it's exactly in the last sort of year or two when the cooperation is becoming much closer. And this event like this, absolutely, hats off to Estonian Association and Margus, to you and Kadri, and for organizing this event. Absolutely fantastic idea, which kind of came out of almost nowhere, a couple of months ago. And this is a great dialogue. And I'm sure going forward, we will have many more dialogues like this.
Thank you. Emma, any additional thoughts on developing the ecosystem together, practical steps?
Yes, I think events like this are a very good start, and I already feel that we are more and more sharing ideas across the borders, and would like to see more events like this and other similar platforms where to share the ideas. And I think the VC associations of the Baltic and Nordics are playing also the important role in the developing the LP activity, or the enabling the LP activity platform.
Great. Chris, do you have final recommendation to us?
Well, we'll continue doing what we're doing, backing funds in the Nordics and the Baltics. We have 4 at the moment in terms of fund positions. I guess we'll be double that in the coming years. And we continue to do our work, and we invite anybody to come and join us on that journey.
Great. We actually have quite many questions, and I think unfortunately we are not able to address them here on this panel as our event is ending. Maybe just one or two. There is a question about, and maybe Matias and others, you might have good insight to it. About returns, do you know if and what type of difference there is in returns if you have single country strategy versus multi-country strategy? Does anybody have that data to compare and prove which one makes more sense?
Well, if we come at from this perspective, of course, we are more of a kind of one country specific and well exposed to it. So I think, of course, then you're averaging out on a lot of the on the market level returns. You're able to get good returns, but of course, there's a lot of volatility inside that. The more, I think, as Chris earlier mentioned, the more you're able to broaden the focus, especially in VC, in terms of geographical reach, I think the probability of getting higher returns, able to choose the best VCs for a portfolio is higher, and therefore there's I think the likelihood of reaching higher returns in the pan-European strategy is higher than having a single country strategy. And also, if you look at the underlying GPs, of course, there's a bit of variance which needs to be taken into account. Also, the development stage, whether you're pre-seed, seed, or whether you're A or B round focused. So the later you go in a strategy, the more you need to be broadening your deal flow in order to get quality deal flow to tap on.
Great. Chris?
The evidence is overwhelming that a multi-country strategy is beneficial, and it isn't just returns, it's actually when you get your money back. Some companies mature much quicker. Some countries have an acquirer that they can move much quicker. So there is this dynamic of the more that you can diversify, the more you have a spread of your returns, both in terms of cash, but also in terms of multiple.
And maybe final one, I find it a bit funny question, but we can elaborate on that. Among all the panelists on the event, is there any fund that EIF has not invested in? I think if you think about the question, it talks about the role of public funding in developing ecosystem. And again, how do you see the public role in developing the ecosystem? And for example, Matias, would you stay forever investing? Is a mission to invest public funding to private markets forever, or at one point of time, public institutions should develop the market to the level that they start stepping back? So any comments from you?
Should I start?
Yeah, please.
That is one hot topic we are discussing, and that's something especially when we see parts of the market maturing, we need to be stepping down. But of course, we need to be very, very cautious about it, because we cannot do it, just saying that we've been investing 20 million in your previous fund, and now we're getting out and saying that 12 months to the first closing. So it is a long-term game. It's very, very difficult when you've entered those positions to get down. But that's definitely in our agenda. We probably will go down on those areas, so we'll see maturing, and if we see reason there to be areas to invest, we'll go in there. But it is a thin-fine balance on that one. But I think it is a fair question asking whether EIF is everywhere. I think the correct question would be whether the national players and EIF are everywhere. Basically, they are in the ecosystem, especially if we talk about first-time emerging teams. So we would need more LPs to impose, like Isomer, investing in the first-time emerging teams alongside with the NPRs.
Great. Chris?
Government funds. The government funds have a vital role to play in terms of just boosting European venture. European venture is in very good health today, compared with 2 years ago, and compared with 5 years ago, bears no resemblance, in my opinion. And that is because governments, and not just the EIF, but the country funds as well across the whole of Europe, have done two vital things. One, they've provided the capital, but also they've provided the leadership in enabling new VCs to start their business. They are very experienced investors. They know, they've sat on so many LPAC advisory boards. They've sat on so many investment committees. They've seen pretty much everything that happens. And that's pretty valuable if you're a new manager starting your new fund in the Nordics or in the Baltics.
Great. Thank you all for joining. It has been really good discussion. And with this panel, we start also wrapping up our today's event.